I think that's coming up in like May, right? Where people from all over the city are encouraged to have these conversations. It's not, it may not be a mass deliberation, we're talking about the same topic, but it gets people from, a fireman sitting across from a teacher, sitting across from a provost, to just talk about their experiences in Chicago. So that's one form of model.
And the theme this year is the message to the mayor. So
right.
it's, it's like a perfect ad for that.
To give those discussions legitimacy. You convert that into policy.
And it's on the table, so it's over food as well. So sort of creating that kind of synergy. Any other questions burning out there? Yes.
So you mentioned that Copenhagen, up until maybe 70s, 80s, was this market city. Was there some event, or what catalyzed that change for them to swap over to the people side?
Yeah, it's a great question. She's asking, why did Copenhagen make this switch to becoming a people city? A couple events happened. One was in the 1970s, if you were alive back then, in 1973, we had this massive worldwide oil crisis. And so the way that the city dealt with it was they asked and required that nobody could drive on Sundays because they had to preserve enough oil for the rest, gasoline for the rest of the week. So they were just going to do that for about a 6-month period, and what happened was the people themselves, after 6 months, asked if they could continue it because they said it's the best day of the week. Because they couldn't drive, they were walking around, talking, visiting. So that was like a first inkling, that people valued people, and that this unintended consequence of you not driving for a day meant people were happier. And they were actually measuring these things. And the second thing that happened was, in 1989, the city was on the verge of bankruptcy. And there had been pushes from the people in the city that there needed to be more equity, they had issues just like we do. And the people were marching in the streets, and the city was basically on the verge of bankruptcy. And a new government was elected in, and they said, since we're going to go bankrupt anyway, we're going to completely change what we do. And we're going to make this gamble that if we focus on people, they were losing, by the way, their population in 1950 was over 750,000. By 1989, it was down to 300-some thousand. Now, it's more than it was in 1950. Why? People are coming from all over the world to live there, and that was what they gambled on. If you make this the best place for people to live, people will come from everywhere with their creativity. They'll start their own jobs if we can provide the education they need, and that will be payoff. So that's what happened.
You had a question as well?
Yeah, so I was wondering if any of the panelists could speak to the issue of housing as a strategy for equity and inclusion. The reason I bring this up is I think about Maryland Lightfoot's plan about addressing aldermanic prerogative and how the ability of aldermen to block affordable housing developments in neighborhoods is kind of undergirded by where the residents who they represent, their fear and aversion to neighborhood change. And I guess I'm just kind of thinking about, since changing individuals' perceptions at the micro level is kind of a tough nut to crack when trying to bring about systemic change.
Easy question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Aldermanic prerogative, how do you dismantle that in the context of affordable housing?
Well, first of all, it needs to be dismantled, for sure. But I think there's a potential. There's moral cases to be made, but I think increasingly we've underutilized the legal cases to be made in terms of. You look at. There's a lawsuit in D.C. in regards to gentrification, saying that gentrification was a plan. And I think, certainly in Chicago, the placement of public housing was a plan, and that plan was segregation. And aldermanic privilege allowed that to happen. And, not to go into too much detail, but we lost an amazing progressive, a woman way ahead of her time, Elizabeth Wood, who was the head of the CHA, who was at least, at the very least, allowing integration to occur in public housing. But I think that rather than thinking about aldermanic privilege and trying to change structural measures that way in terms of political change, I think increasingly we need to look at cultural change and demand these things from our elected officials, which I think can begin to occur, but also legal challenges in terms of how segregated aldermanic privilege has created our landscape.
Well, this has been a really rich conversation. I want to respect everyone's time. I know we said we were going to end at 8. Are there any final thoughts that any of you would like to share? Anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to leave us with?
Just very briefly, we create systems, we can recreate systems to what we want. And I think in this last election, we saw that there's sort of a mass movement to saying we want something else. So it's a hopeful time. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I would just add, I love that you ended on hope, because I think there are opportunities, and to add to the space about inclusion, I think the more that we can think about, inclusion of communities of color as additional ways for our markets to open up, for, economic development and viability for communities, entire communities of people who haven't been tapped into yet. So, I mean, I think that's something we didn't really get into, but I think that's another way to think about it. It's not as people focused as I would like to be, but I think if nothing else, the economic imperative for that approach makes sense. And I think, that's the type of thing that we should be talking more about, but most people are not. I don't think that's something that we've heard yet. So it will be really interesting to see the ways that investment in developing people, developing skills, developing new business owners and entrepreneurs, how that plays out in the upcoming administration.
I would just say that the reason why I focus on structures is because structures don't require any work to continue what they're doing, right? I mean, we can stop today and do nothing, and the motives of our mayors from 1960s, 70s, and 80s will still continue their momentum. That's part of my model of our model of the Ds and the Res. These lines where that face the D policies of racial covenants and racial zoning and restrictive mortgages. I mean, these are the boundaries that were made on the redlining maps in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s are the same boundaries that we're talking about today. So these are structures that need to be dismantled and really have nothing to do with the motives of individuals now. There's plenty of malice to go around, but we don't even need malice anymore. So I think we need to focus on structures. The second thing is, I think we can have a lot of freedom in what we do as long as we honor particular institutions, the institution of education and equity in education, the institution of housing and equity in housing, and health and equity in health. I think that's where we're going as a global society. You look at different experiments occurring around the world in terms of creating equity. And I think if we can just guarantee certain pillars, we can have a lot more common ground in terms of what we do with corporate taxes and what we do with this policy or that policy. But I think that's going to be part of the growing conversation.
Thank you all. I want to stay with the theme of hope. I'm hopeful tonight just seeing everyone who came out, seeing this panel, knowing that we're all working on these issues, and that we'll continue to commit ourselves to equity and inclusive growth. So thank you all for coming. Please give yourselves a hand and give our panel a hand. And maybe some refreshments still over there, so feel free to help us clean up as well. So thank you.